Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. And Friday, March 21st, 2025 at 10 in the afternoon. So now we're going to actually have a walkthrough of the amendment proposed by Representative Harvey. And so we have our legal counsel, Rick Sagal, with us. And he's created a side-by-side so that we can take a look, see what the differences are. Then have some questions for Rick. And go from there. So, well, Rick, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good afternoon. Rick Sagal, Office of Legislative Counsel. And like Mr. Chair said, I have a side-by-side. Would you mind if I just show that as the
That'd be great.
document? I think it's on the committee website too. I don't explain like crazy highlighting here. I'm not sure if y'all had a side-by-side before. It's not that complicated to explain, but every attorney does it differently. So I'll kind of explain what I've done here. So on the left side of the table, you have what the committee voted out 7-4. On the right side, you have Rep. Harvey's amendment. For example, section 1, the findings purpose, there's no changes. So I didn't even include that language. That's the same as what the committee voted out. Section 2, which if you're looking at the Harvey amendment, is on starts at the bottom of page 1 and then on to page 2. So the first difference is, and this is the Ledge Council decision, is the bill that you voted out was in the data broker section. And because the Harvey amendment removes data brokers from the bill, I moved it to a different subchapter within the personal information. This is all inside baseball, but that's why the statute changed from 244.8 to 224.44. Substantively, the first change is the removal of the assignee definition. So, and not just the definition, but we don't use this term in the Harvey amendment. That amendment removes that term and that explicit inclusion of the right of a covered person to basically assign their right to a claim. I can give a little bit of background, Mr. Chair, if you like on that. So generally speaking, people have the right in general to assign a claim. Personal injury is one of them that tend to be one you cannot assign your claim to. If you're injured in a car accident, typically we don't want aggressive companies coming after injured people for that. However, if you are in some kind of predicament where you made breach of contract, a lot of federal laws are complicated. People can't really figure out what their rights are. So there are companies out there that will accumulate these claims and represent the people. So it's kind of a contract, right? You contract your right to this claim that you may have against a person, business, whatever. So in this case, it is strange, and I didn't say this when I walked, it is strange to explicitly include that. I think I'm not going to talk to the intent of it, but it makes it clear to courts that the Vermont law that the House Commerce Committee put forward does include that right. Normally, most laws don't do that. Most laws in our books, you can assign your rights. You don't have to tell us that you have that right. You have that right as a person to assign your right to a claim. Does that make sense? So I guess my point here is removal of the term does not totally remove a person's right in general to contract out your right to a claim.
You want to wait?
Oh, I think because we go along and ask questions.
What did you say? What did you say about a personal? You said that something was not generally assigned.
So personal injury claims. It is state dependent. I don't know Vermont's stance on specifically personal injury cases, but for the most part, like those, there is a societal reason not to do that. Because those tend to be more lucrative in some cases, and you don't want aggressive companies targeting injured people.
So I'm just thinking out loud that, maybe the intent to have, explicitly say that it's assignable is having to do with the remedy, under as passed by Commerce. There was a remedy that sort of sounded a little bit like personal. No?
Which remedy?
We'll talk
Just
about
damages?
negligence, it talk ordinary negligence, it talks about
Liquid damage.
damages.
Liquidated damages are typically seen in contracts, right? Where it's like, it's complicated to determine what the harm is. So we have some of these more complex agreements you have if the
Right.
contract's violated, and usually they're pretty large. It's like, $50,000 for because this harm is so specific to this contract that we've come up with. We predetermined that it's worth about this much money. So
Okay,
yeah,
so you don't characterize as passed out of the committee as a person.
I would not characterize it as personal injury, but I see the
There might be
negligence.
confusion.
Yeah.
I would think that there might be a little confusion, which is why you would make it split.
Yeah. Yeah.
Michael?
Well, Sony had his hand up first.
I just, a clarification. So what you're telling me, legally speaking, this really doesn't do anything.
Leaving it in and taking like either
Yeah.
way, putting it in makes it explicitly clear that Vermont wants these specific claims to be assignable. Not including it based on my research and speaking to my fellow Ledge Council members is it's not common to include this. And just because it's not there doesn't mean you don't have that right to contract with the company to handle your claim. And usually there's like a percentage, right? I don't know what the Atlas, I think it's the company, I don't know what they charge, but usually there's some percentage that they keep because they front the costs. So if they're going to front the costs, usually the contract is, okay, if we win, we'll give you 20%, 30, whatever the deal is. But you as an individual sign that contract and then you are free and clear of the claim, like the rights to the claim.
Yeah. And just in my personal experience in real estate, assignments like this happen all the time. I typically see it in a foreclosure transaction where a bank wants the actual buyer, but they want to, in the intent of fixing it up and renting it out, they will, once the property, during the close, they will assign that contract to the LLC.
That's one example where they're
I see that a fair amount in real estate.
As we dive into this, for process purposes, we as a committee are allowed to make changes to his amendment, correct?
Of course.
And then I'm just curious how that works so that as I'm going through this, because I can tell you there's going to be changes I'm going to want to make. Because I want to support the bill as a whole. But so we make the changes and then
We'll just
we'll just draft a completely new amendment. Okay. And he would remove his, or he would let it.
well, this
there.
would become a substitute amendment for.
Oh, okay.
Amendment of the member from.
Okay.
If he chooses.
If he chooses, yeah.
He could choose
Well,
to
no,
keep this.
Yeah, but we can
Yes.
make a substitute, we can put a substitute.
Okay. Thank you for that. That helps me as we're going forward.
I know it sounds wonky for our new members, but yes.
No, it makes sense. I just want to make sure that I understand.
Yep.
Thank you.
Shall I continue? So no changes to the definition of authorized agent. In the Harvey Amendment, there's the addition of commercial entity, which goes on to replace data brokers in the commerce version of the bill. So a commercial entity, you can read it, it's pretty much any business engaged in the buying or selling of goods or services for profit. So probably explicitly excludes nonprofits. I heard that come up this morning. There was a question about that. But if there is a company that any service, it's not data brokers, it's any business that you're engaged in, you would be potentially covered as a commercial entity. So in this way, it doesn't broaden the scope of the bill to include, a lot more entities, we'll just say it that way. Cover person, nobody was, well, I'll explain what I did here. So on the left side, again, you have the commerce version. The right side, the government lawyers replaces the prosecutors and public defenders. and would include actually people like me, not intentionally. I did not. It may seem like, but if you are a licensed attorney in Vermont that you work for the state or federal government, it may include other government lawyers that are not necessarily assistant attorney generals or state's attorneys, so public defenders as well. So it didn't exclude, Mr. Chair, I see.
Is the public defender's office a government entity? Or is it a,
They're an employee of the state. Yeah, I'll double check that, but I'm quite confident that they're state
I
employee.
know they get money from the state.
Yeah,
I don't know, and I don't, I'm not in that realm, so.
Yeah.
That's why we have you.
They are a government entity.
I will triple check that.
Like, I'm just curious about jurors, because it says later on that it's somebody who served on a jury in the last 18 months. Like, so for the original one, it's like somebody was in a role and then the rest of their life they're covered. For this one, it's like a time-based thing. How would people be able to, I mean, I imagine it could take 18 months to even get through a case or file a case. Like, I'm just curious, the time-based thing, how does that work? It could be just cycling through like hundreds of people all the time.
Yeah, this is something that I brought up towards the end of the discussion before you voted it out. I thought the term active informer is a little confusing. So you start the definition, active or former judges, and then you continue. So I've always thought that just to apply to judges, and I think you think it applies to all.
No. We added jurors in the
Right.
amendment. Yeah.
So, but I thought you also said that other categories would be past or present.
Oh, so you're saying just for the judges? Okay, yeah. And then
But we might need to address that. I guess
Okay,
I might,
okay.
in this amendment, if we are going to go that direction,
yeah.
I think it's a little bit not clear.
Mhm.
It's
definitely not.
Yeah.
Help with that.
I would find a way to make, whatever you want to do, I'll do, but I think it needs to be clarified. And let me go to your point about the jurors.
Yeah.
So if let's say that it does include active and former, everybody, the jurors would need to be separated in a different category because they are just 18 months. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm still just wondering about how people even keep track of that and then act on that in a time sensitive way.
Well, this is kind of the honor system, right? You don't.
Yeah.
have to- yeah, it's all kind of honor system, the way this is set up. So, but
On this, I mean, what about like retroactive? Like, for example, I was a juror.
right.
Would it just be from the point of the law on out? Like, and anyone before that, too bad, so sad?
So it would be at the time you're requesting the cease of disclosure. So if the law's in effect, let's say it's in August, right? And let's say you're a juror in August. In September of this year, if you send this notice out to have your information cease being disclosed, you would be covered because it'd be within 18 months. But if it wouldn't go, is your question if it's
Well, like say,
like before the law's enacted or
yeah, before the law's enacted, like say I get called up for jury duty now.
right? And then in August, you request
And then we
Information.
pass this bill and
Right.
now in August,
you would be covered, in my opinion, because it was 18 months or less ago.
Michael and John.
So
Michael, John, Pete.
oh, okay. So I'm having a difficult time finding or understanding where the confusion is on the active former. Because based on what I see here, it looks like active or former judges, government lawyers, law enforcement officers, federal law, which, I mean, I don't think that's a bad thing. Getting to the members of the General Assembly, I get a little squeamish on that one, because quite frankly, I love you all, but it's something that we sign up for to be contacted by our constituents, and I don't know. And on top of that, I mean, we have to disclose that on our statements and everything.
What about formers?
I think somebody that's been doing public service for 14 years, I would just say leave it out. That's my personal opinion. But
I believe agree.
we do?
Yeah, I agree with you.
Okay, so
Problem with it.
Not to attend.
to get rid of General Assembly.
We're just talking through,
Sure.
I understand it.
Right. No, I'm trying to, as I'm going, I'm like mocking up where I feel comfortable with. And I think that, I think there's a very important role to have. I understand the retired, General Assembly part, but, or not retired, but, non-active, but I think that's probably, yeah, okay. Is that it? Did that make any sense? I think we agreed.
I think. You're talking because it says active or former judges?
Yeah, well, when I read that, it looks like.
That's only for judges, I believe.
That's the problem.
But when I read.
That is the issue.
See, and when I read that, I see active or former judges, government lawyers, law enforcement.
Yeah, that's.
We need to fix it. I brought it, I just want to say, I brought it up before we all voted it out.
You had like a three.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Active or former.
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4, right?
It depends what you want. If you want to include former, then yes, I would structure it a little differently.
I don't think it's bad to have active and former. I don't have a problem with that. The only thing I get a little bit umbrage towards is the members of General Assembly, which I want to know where you all live.
I would personally say for members of General Assembly, maybe former members, I would be more comfortable with.
Yeah, same thing. I would,
Because they stepped out of the public eye at that point.
that's true. I would give you that.
Yeah.
As Herb's thinking about his
I-
future.
No, I just, I think people have been threatened, of course. So that's real. I'm not sure it is the right time to put that category of covered person in here, but that's just my feeling. I mean, maybe, I don't know. I'm just, I don't know about that.
I don't want to debate who's in and who's out right now. I'd love to get through the bill, and
That's right.
I'm speaking for both of us. But I do want to go back to Monique's question because I don't think it was answered. With the jurors within 18 months of service, does that mean they have 18 months of coverage after? Or does that mean they just have to have served within the previous? The jurors piece for me is also it doesn't make sense to me in this context.
Right. So the way, if you're a juror,
It feels very complicated.
right, so it's not clear, right? And a juror defined later as, just to make, means an individual who has served on a jury in the last 18 months. So they get that, they can put in the request within 18 months, right? But upon that 19th month, and then after, if something is redisclosed or new disclosures come up, they would not have that right to request cease and disclosure. Does that make sense? Now we can change this or, remove it, whatever you guys want to do, but that's the
It
current.
feels contrived to me, and
Yeah.
I know we have to draw the line somewhere, or we cover everyone, and I'm just not sure adding anybody else to the list that we had previously makes sense without taking significant testimony and understanding who and how and why and all of those other pieces.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I'm fair with that.
How do we feel about government lawyers? That was a serious question.
Anybody else that had their hand up that? Dave?
Well, I was just gonna throw my hat into the ring about the juror issue, and then my first jury was a rather heinous case. And after we convicted the guy on 3 of the 5 charges, I said very serious case, only then did we find out it was his 3rd time. This was California, so that meant big ticket sentencing. So he was gonna go away for a long time. I mean, this guy one of his earlier charges had been killing his own brother. So yeah, as a juror, I wouldn't want that guy getting out and then coming back and looking for the people who put him up, So that's just the situation that I'm familiar with. There, I have had no threats or anything like that, but that's a scenario that was out there.
Okay, so no other changes to covered persons. I'm going to move on to on the left side is commerce, right side is Harvey Amendment. Commerce includes the definition of data brokers, which it only applies to data brokers. That is removed in the Harvey Amendment. The definition of disclose is amended quite a bit. You remember on the left side what it includes. On the amendment, it is just publicly posting, which open to interpretation a little bit. But I remember this committee also struggling with all these definitions of disclose and how many different words were used to define disclose. But again, pretty significant difference. And it does not have the second clarifying thing that it does not include an organization maintaining protected information completely inaccessible and unviewable to any person outside of the organization.
Rick, in your legal opinion, does the publicly post, is it broad enough to sufficiently include the selling, the giving, the providing, the trading, all those other annoyances? Granted, we went into minutia on, but does that cover that stuff?
It's going to be interpreted differently, right? Because it's not defined. But to me, selling and giving, trading is different than publicly posting. Publicly posting to me means it's viewable, usually on the internet by somebody that's not behind a paywall. It's just available. Zillow, right? Something like that. It's available. So I think if you want to be more inclusive, you can be. I definitely think the amendment is much more narrow in what disclosure is.
How could we modify that to include, I'm going to call it Spookio because it's kind of spooky, even though it's Spokio. I've always called it.
You do you, Michael.
Works for me.
How could we modify that section to include third-party entities that you can go to a website as a regular person and get that information?
Assuming you want a regular person, what do you mean by regular person?
Oh, well, anybody, any individual person that doesn't have a business purpose of doing that.
So they're going on there for what reason?
I don't care why they're going.
Okay.
They,
I think that's part of the point, right? I believe that the bill is meant to prevent, because that regular person could be a bad person, right? Looking for your address to do you harm, whatever, assuming you're a judge or one of these public servants. So I think that is the point. If you want to allow a person that does not mean harm to be able to access it, that might be impossible.
no, I don't, when I mean, if my information was, if I requested my information blocked, I wouldn't want Monique to be able to go on, Spookito and get all my information.
Right?
How could you write that in there?
Already done.
I guess I'm having trouble understanding the.
Is publicly, is that not?
I don't-
Paid.
I don't know.
Payroll.
Right, that's what my concern is that we're trying to, the bill that, the way that I understand it was trying to also get that information blocked behind a paywall. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a really good idea. And I want to capture that, but what I don't want is the business to business transaction portion of it.
But like, what does publicly post mean? What is?
Correct. And you can include publicly post, which makes sense, but I think you have to add an additional sentence that says, and something that will cover that third party release behind paywall.
I mean, the way it stands now,
Yeah.
it's a lot more exhaustive.
The commerce version on the left side. Tony, which one did you mean was more exhaustive?
The 5.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess, again, I'm gonna make sure Spokio, you pay right to access the data. You want that, if this bill were to pass, you want someone to still be able to do that if they pay
No.
for it. You don't want them to be able to, okay. So
So
then I think, yeah, the left side version, the commerce version is going to more solicit some manufacturer and give, provide. I mean, those, how many ways can you say it? Don't show this information, right? Don't give it, don't show it, don't post it, don't make it available for pay or for not for pay. I think that's pretty,
I
Yeah.
agree with you, but what I'm also trying to say that I would like to see is where a business for legitimate business reasons does not, like, for example, it's pretty simple, like, it's not for fraud, it's not for, whatever. I don't even care if it's about advertising, if you're trying to avoid advertising. But there's legitimate business reasons for accessing those third-party databases.
Right.
And me personally, I would like to be able to get rid of everything else, but allow that business to business transaction.
so I think let's get to that. It's in the limitation. We have language, but maybe we can strengthen it.
Okay.
I think because we talked about this last time.
Mhm.
And I think we can talk about it again and see if there's room to make it better. Yeah.
Rick, I'm just wondering, like, so the mix, the combination of removing the data broker focus, adding publicly posted information, and then adding commercial broadly, and then also not exempting government. That combination feels like we get into serious areas. I would love your expertise on this, but it feels like it could be getting into major First Amendment issues, public records law issues, and then tort claims issues. In that we are saying that if I'm posting something to a website, I'm now I'm now liable to be sued if somebody doesn't want it there. Like if I posted Emily's address on my website for whatever reason I did that, I am now can be sued if I don't take that down. And that could be journalists, that could be all the towns and municipalities in our states, the state of Vermont. It just means, I don't know how this isn't a First Amendment issue. Yeah.
So big question. A lot of questions within that question.
Yeah, you can wait till the end if you want to.
I object. No,
You object.
I wonder, Mr. Chair, should I finish the?
Yeah.
These are good questions,
Totally fine.
but especially public agencies, since I haven't gotten to that yet.
Yeah, okay.
I do want to touch on that.
Totally wait till the end.
But yeah, I will hold until I get to that part. Talk about disclose, government lawyer, there's the definition. Mr. Chair, I'll double check if it includes government lawyers. I'm sorry, public defenders. No change to home address, no change to home telephone, immediate family is the same, judge is the same, juror, we talked about that. That's going to be removed if you decide to amend this amendment. Prosecutor was removed because it's included in government lawyer. Protected information, the numbers are different, but the information is the same, except we have a B in the amendment. And B is that protected information does not include protected information, which is defined above, that a covered person voluntarily and publicly discloses on or after July 1st, 2025. That's the effective date of the act. So fairly significant limitation on the bills. The crux of the bill is, as far as someone, if you go put your address on Facebook or social media or home phone number, publicly disclosing, we haven't defined what that is. Is that, putting your phone number on a lost dog flyer? I'm trying to be really crazy because we have to think of these extremes, right? But it would limit the ability of a public servant to have their information cease being disclosed if they voluntarily and publicly disclose it.
But just on those websites?
No, it's just publicly. So it could be.
So that means that any of the entities that we're talking about up above scrapes that off, then they can't go back and tell them to remove it?
As long as you voluntarily did it at some point after the act was passed.
That does absolutely nothing then to protect anything.
Yeah, this isn't a bill anymore.
It's all in.
So this comes from Oklahoma, just giving you a heads up, and I don't know, I don't know.
It's a messenger.
Yeah,
If I presume that this, I'm having a little trouble with B, because I'm trying to understand, that seems to imply that you're only ever talking, the covered person is only ever talking about the covered person's self. But we have definitions that include your immediate family. And if I'm a covered person and I live with my kids or my spouse, it's not, some of that's not just my information. That would be information that belongs to other covered persons. So I just want to make sure I understand, does this do enough to make clear the distinction between the information that pertains to a covered person and identical information that pertains to an immediate family member?
so if you live with somebody that has your same address, obviously, phone number may be different, but if they publicly disclose that information without you knowing it or whatever, then of course their name would be associated with that information. You would still have a right to have your name, your address, your phone number cease being disclosed, but they would not have that same right. So yes, somebody could maybe connect the dots and
Like it's a return address on, like a return address on an envelope that goes in the mail to someone else's house, a birthday party invitation. I just am trying to, that's about, is that my covered information or is it my kids or is it both of ours? But it,
right. It presents, it presents some ambiguities.
okay, so as written, it presents ambiguity. So maybe that's the important thing.
It's a very broad exception, and it's
I think what we're all concerned about is if I want to sell my car and I go on Facebook and say, hey, my car's for sale for $5,000. Here's my phone number. Here's my address if you want to come look at it. Now these data brokers can come in and say, or whoever can say, oh, well, they voluntarily disclosed that information. So now I don't have to either. I don't have to keep it private.
probably, if that's deemed publicly disclosing, which I think Facebook is probably a public platform, so.
Yeah, I was trying to think that, there's these two provisions which significantly narrow the scope of the protection. And one of them is, disclosure and what, I mean, you almost have to make it, because you've changed the focus from data brokers to any commercial entity. It seems to me that the intent that they're trying to figure out, well, how can we narrow that? Because that's a commercial entity. It's much bigger than data brokers. So you restricted the public post, and then you talk about, what protected information doesn't mean. That's the source of, and I don't think those limitations make sense to me, but I think the source of why Representative Harding put that in there is, to begin with, they go and be much beyond just one type of commercial entity to any commercial entity, which I think, in my mind, says, maybe we should keep the data brokers as opposed to expanding it to all commercial entities. That's okay.
Yeah, I am very confused about the voluntary public disclosure of information. Like, if just through the normal course of business, if I'm like signing up for a web service or something, is that publicly disclosing my information? Like, it's very broad. And is there anything that we have in statute that's like comparable to this definition?
This whole data privacy, this is kind of a new-ish area, and Vermont is not quite there when it comes to comprehensive data. I can't tell you yes or no that we have this thing because we don't really have many laws that pertain to your private information. We do have some, but I'm not familiar with this specific language, but I can't say. I will get back to you. If that's okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we're almost there. I just want to, well, now we're there.
Okay.
No, we keep talking about this applying only to commercial entity, but the public agency piece, all of this also applies to public agency, which
Yes.
super expansive definition in in Vermont's law.
Yes, and I'll go ahead and get to, so yeah, public defender is included in the Concord version, not in the Harvey Amendment. For Harvey, because public defenders are included as the government lawyers. So the Harvey Amendment includes the definition of public agency, which is a pretty big expansion, right, of the bill. And this cross definition, if you look at it, 1 VSA 317, is pretty much every entity of state government, local, county, city, state, agency, boards, commissions, everything. And it's part of the public record, so it needs to be defined that way. As far as what this does, this is a pretty substantial change, and I don't quite frankly know the extent. I'm not a public records expert, even though I'm part of the team that handles public records requests. I am learning more about it, but for now, understand that as we go through this, you're going to see a lot of the same requirements of commercial entities, formerly data brokers, applied to public agencies too. And I don't think the committee took testimony on that, so that's a concern I have. I'm concerned about just the legal implications you'll see later of a town facing an injunction. These things make me a bit uncomfortable as far as the legal ramifications of the state placing an injunction on the state. But you know, these things we'll get to like with the amendment.
So we're talking in section A, public agency. We're talking about someone can request that a public agency not disclose the information even when they do a request. Is that what you're?
Let me get there, because
Okay.
we're starting out, if I may.
I have a very quick question.
Yep.
Did that language of the public agency, did that come from another state's model?
So New Jersey has the requirement that a public agency, maybe not as broad as this definition, but now New Jersey also has like an office set up to handle these requests. There's an Office of Information Privacy, I think, that handles these requests and is able to send them out and kind of coordinate with the cities and counties in New Jersey.
Okay.
But if New Jersey has public agency, do they have it mixed also with the broad definition of that we have in this of publicly post? I'm just like that interaction is like
I don't think so,
significant. Okay.
but I didn't look at New Jersey recently. A lot of laws in my head right now.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I'm just that would be the interaction.
Yeah, but I don't think so.
Okay.
Okay, so this is where it gets kind of interesting with the highlighting. So on the left side, again, commerce, right side, Harvey Amendment, I've kind of restructured the amendment a little bit to better fit the method here. So you do have the notice requirement on both sides, that you still have the person that is a covered person still sends this notice that the Secretary of State makes, right, before July 1st, whatever. This covered person still has the right to send this notice to the commercial entity or public agency in the amendment. On the commerce side, it's just data broker. And so if it's yellow, it's new. The language on the right about the Secretary of State exists further down. I reorganized it. The difference comes up when for the public agency on the right side, that if they get the request 15 days later, they shall stop disclosing. I added language here, about this 2440F. So there is a current statute that we have that requires towns and municipalities to take off their website certain personal informations that are not the same as what we're trying to protect here. And it's for everybody. It's your social, it's your credit card information, there's a few other passwords. I don't know why your town would have your password on their website. But there are certain rights everyone has in Vermont to request your town or city to remove certain information. So just kind of saying that this is not affecting that. That right still exists. I had to include that because we're talking about public agencies here. Okay, back to the differences.
So if we already have that in Vermont, where we have public, our municipalities aren't allowed to put certain information out. And you had to put something in there to make it clear that this doesn't conflict with that. Does it make sense to even have this in there, right? Like the public agency piece or the public, it feels like we're really contorting ourselves at this moment, and I don't love that.
Again, as ledge counsel, this is something I would have loved to have more time with structuring, because this is a pretty big change. And I understand wanting to include them, but I'm concerned that I didn't get it right. I'm concerned that I didn't have enough time to research to make sure I am following what we need to do. And I will say that this current 2440, this is in the Social Security breach. It's like thrown in. It's out of, I think how long ago it was passed, but it's a kind of fairly random addition to that section that says, by the way, towns and everything, they must remove these certain details about you if they have them. Not just social security number, like various things that are pretty personal to you. So I don't think that is going to really replace what this would be if done correctly, if done like the right way, where we have covered people's information taken off state, city, town websites. But I wanted to put that there just to make sure we're not deflating that current right people have. Yeah.
I'm sorry. This is all in Title IX?
Yes. It's all the same chapter, chapter 62.
9, BSA.
962 2440.
This would affect GIS, right?
The geographic information systems, as far as
That provides, it provides house, or it provides name, address. That would affect that program. Cause
If it-
I can access it, which. Okay,
so is that publicly available?
that's publicly available.
And you can find someone's name, address. So yeah, they would need to be, so again, these are things that you would ideally have taken testimony and heard from clerks and employees of state agencies to kind of tell you this is what we do. And this is things that we need to have access to. And, we need to have exceptions. Like you'll see at some point with the data privacy bill, there's a lot of exceptions, and that's because you have certain things that need to have certain things done that are exempt. So I do have a phrase that we all love, unless otherwise required by law. Because that's the only way I get to kind of help get through this without, violating something else.
I could certainly tell you that if you had to remove that information from GIS, and that would include, by the way, titles, right? That are on websites as well. That would be a huge pain point for town clerks. And if we did move down that road, I would strongly recommend that we pull a town clerk in here, because they will definitely tell you that please go to the website and grab the title there and check that stuff out there. But if it's, just throwing it out there as, sorry.
Okay, shall I continue?
And I think I'm sure there's a workaround where it would be more manual for them on some of these, but need to be able to get there first. We also, I think, would have to think about people that are authorized to access these records that are offline, that they cannot disclose that information. And so we need to think about penalties for them as well. If there's a disclosure, if they disclose to someone. So there's a lot to think about here. I mean, my thought is, and I still like the idea of what's good for the private sector is good for government too. But I think we need to really think about, this may be a place where we have a study done maybe by ADS, Secretary of State's Office, the Clerks Association, VLCT, to take a look at this and see the extent of, what do we need to do? How do we create this office? What's the cost going to be? How difficult is it for our municipalities and how difficult is it for state government? I guess the whole thing is what's involved in doing something like this. I think, my understanding, Oklahoma did it in reverse. They put it into effect and then want to study back. And, I think at that point, it's a little too late. I think we need to understand just how to create this before we even get into it. Dave, go ahead.
I think that would address my concern that I expressed earlier today about, aren't there some statutory requirements in Vermont that for certain of these covered people, their information has to be available through public means, or at least maintained in otherwise open databases by public entities.
Yeah.
So that would be good to see an assessment of how that would be too, which I think you covered in your, unless contrary to another law or whatever your language was.
Or just to understand what you're saying, are you proposing that we break out this idea that like municipalities and government organizations and agencies would like break that into a whole different section?
No, we would create a study committee.
Okay.
To come back to us with that information of what would it take to do this. And then we take a look at it and we have to understand, how complex is it? What's the cost going to be? What are the other things that we have to think of that we have to put in place in law in order for it to be effective and for it to work?
Okay, I'll continue. So we then have subdivision 2 on the commerce side, which is B on the amendment side. Here, just changing the word data broker to commercial entity. Same thing where they have 15 days to cease disclosing the protected information. The language, the notice provided by the state's office, again, is elsewhere in the amendment, so that has not changed. Going down to the remedies, you may remember Commerce decided 15 days, there should be an injunction, and then 30 days, if they are in violation after 30 days, they're then subject to additional remedies, including damages, actual damages, liquidated damages, and so forth. The amendment is limited to just the injunction. Public agencies and commercial entities would be subject to it 15 days, same amount of time. A difference in the amendment is that the agency or entity would only be liable to the covered person for reasonable attorney's fees and court costs. So damages, either actual, liquidated, the covered person cannot recover that. They could recover their attorney's fees only upon the injunction being violated. That's also
So I guess the question I had this morning was, if an entity failed to follow an injunction, what remedies does the court have?
So the court would set the terms of the injunction, right? They would say this is what, and this would be pretty easy. If you keep disclosing it, you're probably in contempt. And you have civil contempt here. And what the court decides to do for contempt is the court's purview. It could be a penalty, not to the covered person, but to the entity.
It could be a financial penalty.
Yes.
Could be jail time.
If it's a person, sure. Yeah, if you're in contempt of an order, court order, then that's not great. Generally speaking.
Sorry.
And again, it's up to the court to determine that. The bill does limit the covered person's recovery to those two things, to attorney's fees, reasonable attorney's fees and court costs. But yeah, if you violate the injunction, then the court is able to order as it wishes.
Rick, as far as somebody, so what I think that Bill originally was trying to accomplish is people can be proactive about having their information removed. And in this, I'm wondering, like, does this make it so a person actually has to, I guess, what's the standard they have to meet to prove that that they've been violated? Like, does that bar, I guess, raise to a point where it is no longer preemptively protective? It is then they have to prove harm, and now they have no PRA to like do any of that stuff.
So they would send a notice, right, to the company, to the agency, and based on the amendment, and they would have 15 days. And if after the 15 days, your information is still there, you would either hire a lawyer or on your own, right? File a motion for an injunction, and that would be set for whenever the court could have it heard. And then the court would be able to issue the injunction, and then hopefully it's taken down. But if it's not, then you would have to file a motion for a violation of the injunction. And then from there could be a contempt order issued, or you get your attorney's fees at that point.
Maybe.
Yeah, but only the second time, right? So the first time you would not get your attorney's fees, just if the injunction's violated. I want to make that clear. Did I answer your question?
I think so. I was just like the successful proof of it, I guess, was the piece of
It's still negligence, so it's still negligence.
Okay.
That hasn't changed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you just explain how having punitive damages in the original and not having it after an injunction? Because you said a court can add punitive damages, right, to somebody who violates an injunction. Like, this is way outside of my real.
Yeah.
Right.
So if I'm saying things that make absolutely no sense, please, like, say.
So I know it's a good question, right? So when you go to court and you're a plaintiff and you've been harmed, you get certain remedies, right? You can usually get your damages, which is whatever your harm is worth. Okay. It's easy to think of, well, not easy, but car accident, typically we have car. That's why we have car insurance, because you don't have to sue the person. Your insurance takes care of it, right? And you know what the injury is worth. Your car was damaged $10,000. You went to the doctor's office, hospital bills, let's say $20,000. Those are your damages, right? So punitive damage is in addition. It's like, this act was so bad that the court deems you should be punished outside of your actual damages. Like, you've gotten your recovery. However, what the defendant did was so bad that we're going to punish them so they don't do this again. That is separate from a court fining a company for being in contempt. The injured person doesn't get that. That just goes, the court gets that money, right? They fine the company for being in contempt, or they put them in jail. If it's a person, also as a punishment, but the injured person does not get that recovery. Does that make sense?
Yes, so punitive damages would tend to be higher, probably because it's going to a person and not to the court, because the court would only charge fees.
Right. They're making a point. It's trying to be, this is the message saying that this we don't want any other defendant to do this. We don't want. There's a famous case. I won't say the car company that did it, but I think I said in your committee. A car company made a car that this is back in the 70s, when it was in a rear end accident, the car would sometimes explode.
Remember?
Because I didn't say it. I didn't say it. So the car company knew about this, and they had a decision whether to issue a recall, which would cost money, right? Or risk that we'll have this many more people die because we didn't fix it. What's cheaper? And they chose the second option, the cheaper option, which more people died because they didn't fix the issue. So the court in that case sent punitive damages. This was so, but you did this stupid thing because you caused people to die because you wanted to save money. So that's an extreme example, but that's what the point of punitive is like, this was so outside the realms of what we think is general good behavior that we're going to punish you. And that does typically go to if there's multiple defendants, but if it's just one, plaintiff, then yes, they would get the punitive damages as well.
And my only other question is, if we're looking at a backlog in court cases and requiring injunctions is the only way to make a difference. Is that the same or different from the way the law was set up previously, using the courts to, does either one indicate that there would be more or fewer court cases? There are these two.
You still have to probably hire a lawyer. If you don't have the assignment right. And you likely have to pay a couple $100 in court costs, the filing fees. As far as when the court could hear the case, the injunction probably comes up sooner. As opposed to, a civil action that's not just injunction based, but it's going to be dependent on where you live and the docket of the court.
Okay, so no matter, the assignee issue isn't an issue because legally you're allowed to do that no matter what. So that being said, a company comes in, gets a bunch of these assignees, request the information to be removed. After 15 days with the Harvey's, after 15 days, they file for an injunction. The courts can look at it and say, oh, wow, there's 5,000 people here. We're going to give you 15 more days or 30 days to remedy this. If the court's making that decision, we'd like to see us just to move the other information over. Punitive damage, you deserve it. I mean, if the court looked at it and they weighed whether or not you can actually meet what's required, we could take a piece of that court injunction and then add the punitive underneath it. Because at that point, I mean, I don't feel bad for you if you're in a situation where the courts looked at it, you can do it.
Right.
And you're not doing it. You deserve to be punished.
So I think I said this, what was it, this week or last week? I guess it was this week when we walked through the bill. It's rare to include punitive damages in statute. Like, it's just kind of strange. Like, it's usually up to the court or the jury. You have these people that are there, they listen to the case, and they kind of determine this is really bad. Right? This specific action was bad. It's not common in statute to say you're eligible for this. So however you want to word it, if you want to include that they can be eligible for punitive, we already have that in your commerce version. You can keep that. You can word it however you want. It's really up to you all to make that decision.
Can you award punitive damages on an injunction? Generally, you have to file a suit.
Right. And maybe I misheard. No, there has to be.
You have to file a lawsuit.
Right. It's more than an injunction.
Right. An injunction, I mean, you've got to give both parties the ability to be heard. The injunction, you're hearing some, but you're not hearing, a full argument of the pros and cons of everything. Right?
Right. I mean, so let me make clear, an injunction, the defendant will be able to defend themselves.
Right.
And it's whoever has the preponderance of evidence. So whoever has whoever the judge is going to be a judge, whoever the judge believes is worthy of receiving or not receiving the injunction. But yeah, as far as the punitive damages, you could say upon violation of an injunction, but to have punitive damages on that's going to be pretty extreme. That's going to be like really, really bad behavior.
And I'm just trying to get language from the previous bill.
Yeah.
Or into the amendment to compromise on it.
Okay.
So if it's not good on the amendment, why is it good on the original?
Like I said, I can't say it's good or not good. What I'm saying is that it's not necessary. You have the right to get damages in a civil action. You don't need a statute to tell you. But what this statute in the amendment would be telling you is that you don't get actual damages. All you can get is an injunction And then if you have that violated, then you get reasonable attorney's fees and court costs.
Okay. But we could write in there that if you violate that injunction, you are gonna get damages or fines or something. There should be a penalty for breaking an injunction. I feel like that's like, hey, that's a little much.
Yeah, you can run
Yeah,
it.
but I think that's what we've done in our original, saying that you gotta file an injunction. If you haven't redacted the information after another 15 days, then you pay damages. You can be sued and the court can then fine if you should get damages and if you should get punitive damages.
In a separate action.
Right.
So you are having to file two actions. One's the injunction on the one that you passed out, the injunction, and then 30 days, 15 days later, you are now eligible. If it's still out there, you can then file a civil suit that asks for.
That's the normal flow of procedure, I think.
Most statutes just say you have all these remedies available. It's, again, it's fairly strange to put these day periods, these limitations. This is very unique. It's much easier typically just to say harmed individuals have the right to injunctions, damages, you know, in a civil suit. So to be specific like this, you make it harder in some ways to understand, like, what are we doing here? And you make it harder, honestly, to go to court by putting these limitations, which is maybe what you want.
That's a foreboding comment.
Yeah.
But this is what I want to talk about.
Yep.
In the same way that, you know, in thinking through things like an ethics commission and its proper place, coming down to what is the Vermont Constitution empowering the legislature to be, i.e. to judge the qualifications and election of its members. Is there some risk that this is a legislative overreach in being prescriptive about what is a separate branches of government's jurisdiction? Is there any reason that this would be a problem and that we're saying, here's what we know what its damages calculated as the greater of actual damages or, that computed at a rate. You've mentioned how some things it's unusual. It doesn't happen all the time. Usually we say the courts exist to figure it out from here.
Right.
Is that an element that could be challenged? Is there a risk that we're running?
No.
Okay.
Let me be, so it's your purview as the legislature to craft these laws, and frankly, pretty important laws that create criminal penalties, create civil penalties. Without you, there are no things that you can break because you set the laws that can be broken. So not at all. The reason I say that is because usually it's just you create a law and you create a right of action by saying that a violation equals this. You have a right to your day in court, basically. However many words we use to explain that. We're using a lot of words here to explain you have your right in court. And it's because there's an attempt to compromise. You have this narrow right to an injunction, but then if the injunction's violated, then you get either some kind of court costs or maybe you file another suit. So again, as ledge counsel, my job is to kind of guide you and help you understand what you're doing. And this is all fine. You can do whatever you want, right? But it's different and it's confusing for non-lawyers to understand, like, what are my rights here? Like, I have 15 days. How do I get an injunction? Like, what does that look like? And when can I actually get money? So your choice, but just clarifying that there are different ways of doing this. And this is certainly a different way.
Rick, now that this catches up public agencies, does this open up Vermont taxpayers to pay cash liabilities for these injunctions?
So, a town,
Can you explain that a little bit? I don't quite.
We're basically saying anybody can sue any government's entity at any level. So including public records that are on a town's website or commission's website. We're now saying they can be sued. Yeah.
Yeah, so a town that is has an injunction, right? We're talking about the amendment now, right? So a town that gets an injunction, violates it, would be forced to pay reasonable attorney's fees and court costs. So how they recover that money, it'd be taxpayer money, right? That the town has collected. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the interesting, I think, features in Representative Harvey's amendment is that they include the notion of attorney's fees and costs for the plaintiff, who's seeking an injunction has, of course, attorney to get an injunction, they have the costs of attorney's fees. I didn't need to put in there if that's what you want to do. That is interesting. I think you general. And I just contrasted with our Commerce Committee amendment, which did not include reasonable attorney's fees and costs. And
It does.
frankly, I'm wondering.
Sorry. It does. I just had to scroll down. It does.
Well, that's the damages, though, isn't it?
Right. Oh, for the injunction.
Yeah, I'm thinking the injunction part.
Yeah.
And Representative Harvey is saying, I assume it's saying, well, that individual needs to be made whole. They're trying to get an injunction to validate the right. And we're going to award them reasonable costs and reasonable attorney's fees to make them whole in terms of their expense and being able to get the injunction. But actually, in our amendment, we don't include that, trying to make it whole. Seen about this before, but we're rolling along pretty good. But I at some point I'd like to talk about that a little. You understand what I mean?
Yeah, I think one thing we should think about in what we have
Right.
Doesn't require covered person to file an injunction before they can file a lawsuit.
Oh, really?
Because it's
It's or.
Yeah.
or. And so we might want to think about that prior to filing a lawsuit, they have to file an injunction to stop it from happening. And then the remedy for that person would be if they violated the injunction and didn't do what they were supposed to do, then they can then file a suit.
Makes sense.
Well, if that, yeah, I see what you're saying. But in that case, it might be even more important to make sure that the individual, who's trying to file an injunction as the first step in the process, be made whole. In order to, they're just an individual judge or whatever, as opposed to a big corporation.
The assigning language cover both the act described in A and the act described in B? Can your assignee do A or just B?
They can, it's whatever you contract for, so they could do it. Yep.
Rick, does filing an injunction and being successful mean you have to prove irreparable harm?
Irreparable harm. I don't know if that's the liability standard. I have to get back to you on that.
Oh,
He was. I saw.
this is something that has been knocking on my mind. That both our bill and the amendments specifically say that one doesn't, what is it? You can't invalidate, there's no validation is not a requirement to claim status as a covered person. And how does that assertion work with the notion of harm? Is there a counter argument to be made that big tech, I can't even assert, we don't even have to assert that there's truth to your assertion as a covered person. How then can we know, how is harm knowable if inclusion is presumed?
So you don't have to prove you are the person you are when you send the notice, right? So they receive the notice. And then if they don't stop disclosing it and you decide to file an injunction, then, the court could ensure that you are who you say you are. There's nothing that in the bill that would prevent that from happening, where the court, right, then make sure that, are you really, John Cooper?
Yeah.
Then,
Or, okay, and is it about verifying my identity or verifying my claim that that identity is that of a covered person? Like, I can't just say I'm a covered person. The only,
right.
but what would be verified is that, and I am a public defender or something like that. Like, that's the second component. And I'm wondering if we don't have a mechanism for showing that to be true, how can we have a mechanism for showing there to be harm?
So if you file the injunction and you claim to be a covered person, but you're not, I guarantee you the defendant's gonna make you prove that you are a covered person
Oh,
by providing whatever identification you need to prove that, right? Either your paycheck or whatever it is, that you are who you say you are. Again, this is not for the notice, right? This is just for court.
right.
But between notice and court,
Okay,
those companies, it depends on which one we're looking at here, but an entity would not be able to question you until you're in court and they say, well, you haven't been harmed because you're not a covered person. You're a general assembly person. You're not. Yeah.
This comes before the injunction activity.
Right,
Okay,
right,
thank you.
right,
Got it.
right.
So if let this happen. I should have wrote it down, but I did.
I can ask one real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
Rick, when you look into the irreparable harm piece, can you just, as far as us again being proactive requests before there's actually harm being committed, so just asking for information to be removed, just wondering if you could tie that in when you look up irreparable harm, like the burden, how does somebody do the burden of proof if no harm has been done yet, I guess?
And I thought about your question earlier about the harm. We do have both amendments, the Commerce report and the Harvey amendment, both have that it's ordinary negligence. It's a standard default. So I will double check if that supersedes the default irreparable harm standard, because the statute says again, the Harvey injunction amendment is just for that ordinary negligence. For the Commerce report, it's for both the injunction and the civil action. So I'll double check if that.
Sorry.
And then for your other question, I'll look that up as well.
Yeah.
I was gonna have a calm weekend.
First mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could we, on the Harvey amendment, a data broker that violates an injunction is subject to damages calculated as the greater of the actual damages, punitive damages, reasonable attorney fees, and preliminary equitable relief as the court determines to be appropriate.
Maybe I'm just wondering. Usually when you violate an injunction, that's, contempt of court. It's a big deal. Like, it's not great that you've done that. And the court usually has wide latitude to punish you as they see fit. And right now on the Harvey amendment, we're saying, as far as the person goes, the plaintiff, you can get attorney's fees and court costs, right? If you want to add in actual damages, we can do that, but the court's still gonna make its own determination as to what those are, if any, right? And punitive, if any. But if you want to add that language in to be inclusive.
Well, I get back to because currently, the way that it's currently set up in the bill, it's 15 days or wait 30 days and then.
On the Commerce, right?
Right. What I'm suggesting is that I get back to my original comment, which is you violate an injunction, the book should be thrown at you. Because that's an independent look at the circumstances of the situation. And if an independent look says you can do it within this time
Mhm.
and you don't, you deserve everything that's coming at you. And I don't have any sympathy for anyone that does that. Maybe I'm, oh, am I looking at it wrong? Maybe I'm looking at it.
No, you can expand that. It's up to the committee. You can expand that to include, other damages to the covered person, certainly.
Okay. Yes, I'm wondering, sorry, I'm thinking like about, is it possible, I guess this kind of did it, but is it possible to put in just sort of minimum standards as opposed to maximum standards?
Well, in the which version are we looking at?
I guess I would say maybe in the original.
The Converse version.
Commerce version.
So the minimum is 1,000, right? Whichever is greater. So
So it's rather.
yeah. So punitive is you're never going to set. I mean, I wouldn't do that. You could, but
I guess what
I would hesitate to tell the court this is the bare minimum of punitive damages that you want to.
I guess what I'm thinking of, actually, it's more in a criminal context with, I'm not a lawyer, obviously, with sentencing guidelines. Like, how is that able to be, like, how are you able to kind of guide the court?
Oh, we can set no. So now, right now, we don't have like any set fines. You can add a fine
Okay,
that if you want to go that route. That you have the covered person, their harm, but then if you want to
Go upstairs, right?
punish the business or public agency, however you want to structure this, then you could say a fine of not more than, X amount of money per violation or whatever.
okay.
Yeah. So that's another option that we haven't talked about actually a whole lot is a civil penalty for the entity. Yeah.
Because again, I've said it way too many times, but you've violated injunction. I have no sympathy.
As far as my opinion on the civil penalty, I don't think there should be any limit. Because then our courts could fine Google $500 million. Whereas there's a smaller data broker, maybe not so much.
Please tell me
Oh, is he-
my
you're
facial
talking-
expression was not
But
registered.
we're not on Databricks.
Google's a commercial entity.
So it's like the town of Bradford. Or Montpelier, or Burlington, or Castleton. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I was just asking, so you were talking about the $1,000 limit, or you talking just separately?
We've been talking about like punitive or injunctions and like for contempt of court. I think that should be left open because that allows a court during an injunction to create a fine that is proportional to the ability of whoever is the violator. As far as the public agency, I'm actually fine with removing that completely from the bill because I think there needs a lot more. We need a lot more work on that.
So another way to approach that, which I actually don't want to go down. Which, I mean, a lot of times when you have a big entity and you got a lot of little individual providers, you tell a regulator, enforce the law. Right? And they have mechanisms to, examine, figure out what an appropriate fine is, etc. And cease and desist is just kind of like a civil, an agency injunction kind. That being said, we don't have time for that.
What agency would you put that there?
I think the two options would be the AG or the FR. I mean, that's fine. Probably shouldn't have raised it because really we do not have time for that.
Well, right now, they're not under any agency.
They're not, although I would say that the AG has some responsibilities over that kind of thing.
And I remember someone saying, well, the agent didn't really want any part of that. But I didn't hear her testimony like that. I was hearing her testimony about the bill that was in front of her and thinking that it was, she was okay with the bill as opposed to, I don't want any more regulatory authority. Because that would solve some, okay, I mean, so. Okay, but
Questions maybe for Rick or from me, whoever maybe here in the room has the most familiarity with the New Jersey approach. Was that office set up at the time with the legislation itself, or was that something that emerged to provide necessary?
I don't know. Yeah, good question. I don't know how they set it up.
I think trying to remember from what Matt talked about, it happened after they had set the original law.
Yeah, that's my recollection. And also I think same for Oklahoma. I think a lot of times from what I've noticed, they kind of set out the basics of the law and then go back and have another round that makes all of the adjustments.
Yeah, as far as like them covering the government stuff took, from what I remember, it took like 3 years for them to stand that up and
Yeah.
a pretty hefty sum of money. Yeah.
Were there problematic, oh no, the freeholders of this New Jersey township are.
It was Public Records Act questions. Yeah. Like how to even handle that.
Yeah, I see. Did they have a provision that was like, no action can be taken against?
Not sure. But we also don't get into like potential tort stuff of like towns are not like people getting sued, like where there's like, we don't deal with Title 24 stuff in here, but VLCT has raised concerns.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, may I finish the walkthrough? And then ongoing thing that
We're trying to keep it.
with my bill.
Stagger.
Where are those UCC bills? And then someone else came and talked about it.
Committee that likes to work right through Friday afternoon.
Remember
Their birthday.
that? 834 as introduced. What a trick that was. All right.
Go on.
A long time ago. Yeah. All right. So again, a couple other things to keep in mind. We're done with one thing that Commerce had is this under subdivision 2, it shall not be a defense to liability in a judicial proceeding that the covered person's protected information is or was available to the public from the sources on the internet. Otherwise, you may remember that's kind of a loophole protection that a entity would be able to say, well, it's already on Facebook, Google, whatever. That is not in the amendment. Something to consider. That language, so everything else is there. Okay, limitations. This data broker limitation was removed because data brokers we're not using that definition in the Harvey Amendment.
But they are still covered, just confirming that.
Yeah, they would be, of course, a commercial entity, right?
Can, on the commerce bill, this section does not apply to a data broker disclosure pursuant to subdivision 1 of this section. Can you tell me where that is?
That is E1. So if you go up to have it highlighted on the screen, it's a disclosure of protected information shall not constitute a violation of the section if the disclosure is, and it includes A and B as well. So when we added that as committee, and I recall the thinking was we kind of just belts and suspenders. we one A and B is clearly we want these to be outside the scope of the bill. Meaning that and this is kind of, I'm glad you brought this up. This is back to what you were talking about, the business to business, that if a covered person expressly authorizes this disclosure, or if they have a transaction that you initiate, then the data broker should not be subject to have violated this bill because the covered person, you okayed it because you're getting a credit report, you're trying to apply for a loan, whatever it is. Now, this would be, if you want to expand this and include this would probably be the section to do it. The business to business transactions, however you want to word that. I think if you're concerned that that's not included here, then we can maybe add language to say.
Me.
There you go.
I would like to add, business to business transaction, which would be, legitimate consumer business.
So then we go back to anybody can have a DBA doing business as, and they are a business. So that would give a gigantic loophole because it would be their legitimate business, whatever it is, right? Like we can't define that very clearly. Maybe Rick, the magician, define that very clearly, but we would have to really understand which business entities.
It's still at the risk of the cover person is trying to do something, right? Why are the businesses communicating?
There could be a myriad of different reasons.
Okay.
But it's to buy a car.
But because the cover person is trying to buy a car.
Right.
So they have authorized something. Maybe not directly, but there's this domino effect of like, hey, I want to buy a car. I got to get a loan. So then, the car dealership contacts with their finance company and they run a credit check or whatever. And I would argue maybe express is too strong. Maybe you can kind of massage that word a little bit.
Yes. Massage that. Little scented oils, rocks, candles.
But then B is all, for the sole purpose of facilitating a transaction, including. So if you use the word including in Vermont statute, it's not just limited to what you include. Exhaustive, thank you. So you could say including, if you have a few things in your head that you think are really important that the committee agrees on, we can have like including that.
So you could include what is it,
Wiley. Yep.
for instance.
Federal law.
What are insurance companies covered under? I mean, you could even talk about covered entities under DFR regulation, but
So I would maybe add like a C with, A, B, and then or C, which is a list of those typical data privacy. Are those what you're thinking about? Those data privacy exceptions?
the exemptions that we have.
You're glad that you did that.
Business.
Okay, that was good, yeah, like
Right.
data when it's pertaining to business transaction specific, okay, yeah.
I have a question for Michael. Is this getting to the example that you use about having to, no? Let's 100%.
I'm trying to digest
Okay.
this just for a minute here. And
Well, I think then this may be a part of that as well. But because we see A or B, and I think there was some notion here of maybe now and
Right.
or C, but one of my questions is where initiated by the covered person, this is where I run into my limitation of knowledge about how information moves from one place to another. Is there such a thing as a transaction that is facilitated but not initiated, but pertains to a
Right.
covered person? And that's sort of where I just don't know, and that's kind of what I'm trying to get at, is the agency implied in B for the actions of the covered person. Is that, and I think we've talked about things like, we've talked about ways to sort of make an exception to that, but those all seem to come right back to the covered person. And I think, Michael, much of what we talked about earlier seemed to be that you had some awareness of perhaps other transactions that are not.
so, for example, I'm a consumer organization that checks unclaimed property sites or consumer health. This is really all hypothetical. But part of my mission is to notify people of, hey, you know what? You have funds that are available to you. They would not, that's not covered underneath this.
So that's, all right.
Did that make sense?
It does, and I'm trying to see if in this potential C that the chair sort of suggested or we just discussed, seemed like it was trying to get at that class of activity. And and I'm trying to understand not just the language of that potential C, but also the commercial behavior of what it would be about. So I think that is helpful.
Would it be the sole purpose of facilitating a transaction beneficial to a covered person? I mean,
I wouldn't use the unclaimed property piece because those are
Every transaction you do is beneficial.
three.
I know.
Publicly available already.
But we're pretending that there's a magical benevolent company that does that. That's what I was trying to pretend to be.
I think if you're talking business, you know, if we're worried about an insurance company that's looking at the master death benefit, then if there's a worry there that they can't access that, I think if we're talking about any entities that are regulated by DFR, which they would be. Same thing when we're talking about, you know, if there's anything in the medical world. Any type of those business to business transactions. That you might be thinking about, I think could be allowed. Same with financial institutions, and I mean, they're covered under Graham Leach and and they're also covered under DFR if they're financial institutions that are chartered in Vermont. So
Is there a way for us to specify that in there? Yeah. That would make me feel a lot better. And it would fix the problem of the crazy person getting a TIN. Or an ITIN. No, wait, EIN. Or no. A TIN. Tax. Whatever. Whatever. Yeah, DBA, yeah. Is that something that we can?
So you want to exclude transactions that concern those
Or organizations that are covered under.
organizations?
Or business, whatever the term is, businesses, organizations, entities.
Data information,
That is covered.
right? So not the businesses, just the data and the information.
I
'Cause you-
don't know if this is fixing my business to business, and so
It's,
what I heard over here is
gives you an
different
exemption from,
for,
so it's
Entities.
exempting those entities that are
Covered.
that would be covered under
yes.
any federal or state jurisdiction.
Yes, I like what you said. There was other comments made that made me not comfortable, but what you're saying is what I like.
So are these entity-wide exemptions? I think that's what his concern is. Are we talking entity exemptions or just certain things the entities do is exempt?
So those. It's it's not the entity themselves, it's the data that they have that is covered.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So it's not because there are entities out there that provide services and have data that is covered by regulation.
Right.
But they also have subsidiaries under their business that provide things that are not covered by agencies or federal or state. And if you give a total entity exemption, then you're exempting the total entity and they can do whatever they want with, right?
Would,
So, you know, see what I mean?
I see what you're saying. I'm wondering if it would be better based on transactions that are covered by those
That's-
organizations,
Well, that's,
or not organizations, but by DFR and TIFA and
Well,
whatever.
I mean, yeah, as long as we're not giving an entity exemption.
Yes,
It's the data exemption that's covered. It's the data that's covered under, that would be exempted. It's covered by by federal or state entities.
By a regulatory scheme that governs what those entities can and cannot disclose, right?
So we're talking about DFR, talking about the Graham
Reach Bliley,
Bliley.
if,
GLBA,
insurers are covered under
GLBA.
DFR. Insurance.
Sorry, what's Graham Riley again?
It's a federal law.
Federal law that gives banks regulation.
Right,
Banks and
financial
insurance,
institution.
They're covered in different ways.
I was gonna say, can we make sure financial institutions, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not like this sort of idea, no, this regulatory structure, not structure, this bill is different from a regulatory scheme.
Yeah.
So they do it in different ways, and it might be narrower, it might be broader, you know, whatever, but it's different.
I'm sorry to get into this, but I'm still having trouble grasping how this all would work on either side. Say I want to buy a house. When I also want to sell my existing house, but I'm a covered person and I've tried to do my due diligence to get my stuff obscured. I'll use that term, not a legal term, but forgive me. I sign with a real estate agent. I sign with an attorney and I apply for a mortgage. Now, somewhere along the line, you know, everybody's going to need to do due diligence. The bank is going to contact, get credit reports. And is in my case, when the property I bought, there were legal complications, and my house in Clarendon Springs, they had to open probate in New Jersey on somebody who died 50 years earlier. So there were complications from that. I'm not saying it's going to be that every time, but still you can see I'm ahead of that. There have been landline concerns. So a surveyor, an engineering firm had to get involved. The lawyer is also going to reach out to a title insurance company. All those people have a piece of the pie. Do I have to give each of those entities permission if I've already filed my paperwork, or do I just do it once for each entity as I normally would? And then that domino effect that we're talking about here would cover whatever situation arose. I'm just trying to figure out.
So you're asking, that's all the heads nodding or shaking, but you're asking if whether you have to fill out multiple forms to exempt. So I think no.
So after it's exempt.
Right.
To allow folks to have access to the information that had been hidden.
Right.
Because now it needs to be unhidden to do all the rest of this work.
Right. So I think if the language is correct, right, if we get this correct, the idea here is that you shouldn't have to do anything. That it's already those companies that are doing this based on your wishes to buy a house, get a mortgage, whatever, that they're not subject to this bill because they're exempt. Like that activity that you've authorized is exempt. So you shouldn't have to, beside your typical forms, saying that you sign something saying you can run a credit check, whatever. The thing that anyone does anyway, right? No matter what happens to this bill, you still have to do that. If this bill dies, you're still doing that. However, this is not going to change that ability for a company to do those things, to make sure you are who you say you are and run those checks they need to check.
I think by whatever language Rick comes up with, exempting this data from these businesses that are covered entities under certain regimes will never have to redact your. And if you request that, they will let you know that they are not, that they can't do that, right? So, I mean, if you request them to redact your information, they should come back and say, we can't do that.
Okay, can I ask a follow-up? If I've already, filed the exemption, the request not to disclose, and then I voluntarily purchase a house, which gives me newly recorded deeds and other information. We saw that language earlier, I believe it was on the Harvey Amendment side, where it talks about voluntarily. Does that negate my exemption and I would then need to do it again? Or?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't quite know the formula to my question, but I'm just the exemptions piece for this is hard because we still haven't finalized data privacy stuff with all the exemption stuff we were looking at, but for in the case where a regulated entity might have an arm that is selling data, are we then saying that the piece, the arm that's maybe profiting off just selling data, not doing transactions, is there a way that we can separate that the selling of the data piece is not okay to keep doing, and that the piece about actually doing the actual legal pieces of, if we're concerned about the mortgage piece, but then that company that has a broker side that's really just exists to do property search or people search or something to sell that and make money off of it, I'd feel more comfortable about saying it's okay under GLBA for financial institutions who are trying to do business as, the consumer is requesting, but not exempt them fully from being able to have a second arm or subsidiary that is then taking information they have and then selling that, which I think happens.
Right. So I think we just need to be careful how we word the limitations,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Because normally that if we didn't have this, they wouldn't be allowed to do that, right? So now because we're adding these limitations that are meant to help and, facilitate these transactions,
Right.
you are worried that you're opening up Pandora's box to
Yeah.
these companies with ulterior motives to sell data because they have this exemption, right? So I think it's just how we write this to ensure that we're not doing that. And I don't know, but I understand your concern. I assume you guys share that concern that you don't want them to, use that as a.
Before you don't get an entity level exemption.
Right.
I just the business to business, technically it's still a business to be selling and they could be selling to another business. So it's still a transaction.
But I think
it's
we
not
need to-
a transaction a consumer would necessarily want.
I think we need to keep it, we need to keep the the covered person as part of this process.
Yeah.
Something they are requesting something.
Right.
It may not be directly, it may not be expressly authorized, but they are involved in something, buying a house, getting a car, and they have to be the impetus for this transaction happening here.
Exactly.
So however this is structured, I understand the concern. I think we can. Okay. I think we can stitch together. Frank and Bill is gonna be.
For me, as I think about this, so I'm, in my day job, I have a HIPAA regulated profession. And for years, I've had people who, will fill out a form that says, please share my health information with these people. You can only share this window of information and you can only share it for this one time. So they don't have to reestablish that their information is HIPAA protected. And I just, to me, it seems like a tweak of some sort to E1, A, and B should be able to make that happen. so that it flows through from that they initiate a thing and that somehow that then that follows them through so that you wouldn't have to go through all that court process that because you already once said, I'm starting this process. I give everyone basically all the line down through permission to do what they need to do, but only for this set of data pertaining to me, only within just this instance, not this purpose and perpetuity.
So I think if I may answer that, I think, it's possible. I don't know if the committee took testimony from, I think Chris D'Elia spoke, right? Did he request a specific exemption for his people he represent?
I don't
I don't
think so.
think he
He was
did.
just worried that they wouldn't be able to access the information if someone asked for their information to be redacted. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Right. So
So those entities would never redact it because they're never sharing it outside of the realm of whatever regulation they're under.
yeah.
I think Chris's example was like having to send out a car recall to somebody, but that also still would not be an issue because presumably that dealership has a direct relationship with that person that they would be servicing.
They wouldn't be a data broker. So also keep that in mind here, right? If we're going with the Commerce Amendment, we are talking about data brokers. We have data brokers defined as this not direct to consumer relationship. It's a company that, sells first brokered information of people. So sometimes I think we forget about the scope.
So using your car dealership, thank you. The car dealership no longer has the address of the person. They're reaching out to the data broker to get that information. That is the transaction that I'm trying to protect under the business to business transaction. It's not protected here. I think it is. Well, but the direct, not a dealership. Let me rephrase that. Jeep. Let's say Jeep has issued a recall. I do not have a direct relationship with Jeep. I have a direct relationship with whatever place I bought it down, dealership. Jeep reaches out to whatever database there is that provides information. That's the business to business transaction that I'm trying to protect. And I think that
So when you buy your vehicle in the contract somewhere, we'd have to find out, but I would imagine that there's some clause in there that number one, they're collecting data on you all the time anyway through the computer. And you have already given your permission for that.
Yeah.
Right?
Entering into that.
Now, if they're turning around and they're selling that data, then they're a data broker, which means they have to be registered in Vermont. And I don't know that Jeep is registered as a data broker in Vermont. If they're not selling the data, then they're not a covered entity under, they're not that entity under, they're not a data broker.
So can someone explain to me why we can't, put the limitation in there for, I'm really confused why we can't add that in there where it's covering transactions that are already regulated by other.
Well, I think that's what Rick's.
That's what we're talking. Yeah.
That's what we're
Right.
talking about.
Okay.
Your example of Jeep being able to contact you if there's a recall, they can still do that because they're not a data broker. Unless they're registered and they're selling data that they constitute a data broker, then they're not even in this.
Right, but they're reaching out to a data broker to find information.
They should have that information already. That should be their information.
But that's what I'm saying. Like if organizations that can't find people reach out to data brokers to get this information. And that's where like information flows very quickly between organizations to facilitate those type of things. And if we right into there, it's not, it's limitations don't, it's transactions are covered by, that are covered by, DFR or whatever, HIPAA or.
Yeah, but
I'm not making sense.
no, I mean, your example would not be covered by what they're talking about, because you're talking about a recall, right? That's not gonna be regulated by DFR or anything else that we've talked about as far as exceptions. So you're talking about Jeep wanting to get a hold of the owner of the vehicle because they need a repair. They have a legal obligation to inform the owner of the vehicle that their car has a recall, right? And they don't have their information of the person. So they reach out to a data
Yeah.
broker.
That's a legitimate business, right? Like that's a legitimate business action. Everybody here would agree with that, that's a legitimate.
Well, they don't
business
do a
action.
very good job because there was a Volkswagen recall and I keep getting my.
I was gonna say, I keep getting stuff.
I get a recall notice that comes to my house from my brother that lives in Florida.
Oh, accuracy that was what I was gonna say. Like accuracy, they already are not accurate.
Mhm.
And is accuracy an actual definable thing in this?
And I think on top of that, they may have access to your data through DMV records.
That's interesting.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because vehicles are bought and sold all the time. And so I know insurance companies have access to data at DMV. I don't know that. Car manufacturers have that access, they might.
The data brokers have access to that information. The third party, like an insurance company, would reach out to the data brokers. And what we're saying, and that's,
Then DMV is a data broker, and I know that insurance companies have access to your records at DMV.
I was gonna say, I think it's important for us to remember that this doesn't apply to everybody. I mean, this applies to the people this small limited group of people, and of this small group of people who choose to want to have their data redacted.
Right.
And so if I fall into that category and I choose to have my data redacted, then I should know that they might not be able to find me, first things. People who I don't know who would be looking for me might not be able to find me. And I am accepting a certain level of personal responsibility for my choices.
And maybe we have a disclosure piece in there that has to, if they choose to do this, that there's a disclosure that says you may inadvertently stop some legitimate, right? I don't know how to word it, but I'll leave that to Rick, but I think we have to realize that people are choosing to do this. They don't have to. We're not saying every judge and law enforcement officer. What we're saying is we're giving you the ability to do this if you so choose. And so, but if you so choose, here are some of the ramifications that could happen to you if you do this. And then to the data brokers, we're saying, and now if you're asked to redact this information, my information, and you don't do it, then we'll file an injunction. And so I think what we need to think about is, are we more comfortable filing the injunction, creating a fine scheme to fine the perpetrator instead of allowing for, but at the same time, if they, and taking Zach's language as well, would be that if they, if the data broker doesn't follow an injunction and violates the injunction, then you we'll recover your court costs and your lawyer fees. Michael?
We should do more. If you break the injunction, it should be more than just court costs. And
Well, that's for the person, but then there's gonna be fines on top of that. That the court, and we can specify what those fines are. You do it once, it's $1,000, do it twice, it's 5,000, do it 3 times.
50,000.
But that's not, I mean, we'll have to talk to.
500,000.
$500 million.
We'll have to talk to our judiciary committee about. They're the ones that are gonna have to think about that.
I guess that also makes me think about, Chair had suggested, it seemed that if there was some reason that we might view it as criminal, that we could be interested in, I thought that was something that was kind of a nexus for them of why they let it go for us, because it was a consumer, not criminal. But if we're dwelling in the realm of civil and finding that to be sticky, is there some reason why criminality was not something they posited?
The only thing I could think of that would, they might want to entertain as criminal would be if, like what happened to the judge's son in New Jersey. They could become,
Accessory.
an accessory
Yeah.
after the fact.
The worst case scenario. Okay, all right, not
So,
ignoring injunctions. Okay, thank you.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
it would be more in bodily injury, bodily harm, that type of thing. And so I don't know that we're there yet, but I think we could come to a place where they could provide some high level fines, civil fines.
That be an effective deterrent?
Oh, that's what I'm thinking. If people are worried about trolls coming into Vermont and just trolling companies, which aren't in Vermont. Anyway, we don't have Vermont companies that are data broker. That this is the next best thing, I think, in providing fines if they violate an injunction.
Slightly off topic, but close. I do like the idea in Representative Harvey's amendment to include the ability for the individual, the covered person to retain, to be awarded attorney's fees and costs.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if, we want to entertain that in whatever Rick's coming back with.
Yeah, we already have it on there.
Well, that,
We have it in the
yeah,
commerce one too.
yeah, but that's
Yeah.
after.
Oh,
Yeah.
and the new one. Okay, yeah, okay, got it. Okay.
Imagine what C1A,
Okay.
there's no provision for attorney's fee. Correct.
Just for clarification, because this is something we haven't, I don't think, discussed directly. Are we still thinking data brokers and not general commercial entity? I mean, personally, a commercial entity for me is a really difficult thing for us to do without taking testimony on. And so I'm just curious if other folks are in the same place, or if that's a.
I can go either way.
I think we would need testimony.
I think, me personally, I think dumping the commercial entity is a good idea. I also think we should dump the agency or public agency. And just replace
Yes, I
it with
agree.
data broker. I've made some markups. Could I go through what I would like to see?
So jump in on to answer the question, then I'm happy to hear more. Michael. Was that one of the things that I would actually like to hear more testimony about is really that question. Are you a data broker or not? Because I think that I think Mr. Chair, you talked about how there are like businesses that have wholly owned subsidiaries, or that and it's like, well, then who is one? And where does, oh no, we're just another commercial entity and we just happen to mail people things so we know their addresses. And I think like having a sense of that in terms of testimony.
We already have a definition of data broker.
Yes.
So, this would be under that definition of data broker. And so the one we have data brokers that are already registered in Vermont, and there's 900 and some odd.
What's the one? I'm sorry, I'm getting confused. We said number one on a couple of occasions. What's that?
Well,
one?
there's a company in Vermont that is not, I think, under our definition of data broker, considered a data broker. Under California law, they're
In Texas.
considered, in what?
In Texas.
In Texas, are considered a data broker.
Oh, and we don't. Okay. All right, so then maybe that's not a good use of our time. Okay.
What if you're Waltz Widgets, who's been in business in Walton, Vermont for 100 years, but since the electronic age has come along, you've added online and electronic sales, and you do as a side business now, because you need that information to complete your transaction, you now make available that information that you gather, either the wholesale to other, legitimate data brokers or to individuals. You've got Waltz Widgets data on the sideline. Is that person then considered a data broker and they should be covered? That's the kind of thing that I don't know if it, how pervasive is that in, the general commerce world these days? Because there's so many folks that are online these days doing their business. Do they also now have a data arm that I would think we would need to know that? What's that?
If you're selling it, like
Do we know that, so how do we find that out?
Well, that would take all of this.
But if we were to include, I know, like keep the commercial element in, but narrow it down to only if you are selling other people's data, kind of as a side business.
Because isn't that kind of already?
Yeah, that's what data broker is.
I mean,
Is it?
Kind of. I mean, that they would be more expansive data brokers if they're just selling data, because data brokers is specific, and we have a lot of exclusions on what are not data brokers within that definition. So I think we need to kind of narrow down here.
So number one, we're not looking at the whole expanse of every Vermonter. We're looking at judges and law enforcement. So that's narrowed down. We can't worry about what small businesses are doing in Vermont and whether or not they're registered or not as a data broker. That's on them, right? Your business, you need to know what you're doing and what you have to do to whatever regulations you fall under, or whatever licenses you have to have. What we know now, there's no Vermont business that's registered as a data broker. If they're doing that, they better get registered, because there are penalties for that, right?
Excuse me, even if it's a subsidiary or a small sideline to what their main business line.
If you're selling, I mean, you're supposed to register.
You have to know.
Title 9, Chapter 62. There's a definition, 2430.
Thank you, Edie.
There's a def,
One of the first states.
We're the first.
It was the
It
same.
was first state. Okay.
Was here for that. So I think let's look at Zach's amendment. What do we want to keep? What do we want to, not just keep, but what are some of the ideas that are in there that we can incorporate into substitute amendment? So I think I need to know where you want to go. So
There's one more section we haven't gotten to. We added a reporting section in the amendment that has the state court administrator for the next 5 years report back to the judiciary committees on just the injunctions, how many are filed, how many are granted, denied.
that's not I mean, I think that's a good idea. It gives us an idea of, are data brokers not complying, that type of thing.
Yeah, okay, so that's the effective,
I don't know what the rest of the committee thinks.
the effective date is the same. I did take out this because there's no civil remedies. So that was not in the RB amendment. So you just want to go from the top to bottom and just yes, no? Okay. Assignee, I hear that it's okay being left in or taken out.
I would just remove it.
I would keep it.
I don't have a problem with removing it. I don't think it makes.
If it doesn't change.
Yeah, sure.
It seems fine.
Yeah, I do know New Jersey didn't have it at first and they added it. So I don't know the reasons why, but you can always add it if you think it's going to be helpful.
Things
Later on.
if someone hires an agent to find, you know, to to notify data brokers that they need to redact them. And if they find out that they're not doing it, then they can go out and hire an attorney to file the injunction, right? So I'm okay with.
Okay, so striking.
Everybody good with that?
Striking it.
Striking assignee.
Yep.
Okay. Striking commercial entity, keeping data broker, right? You want to keep.
Yeah.
I'm wrong side. I'm looking at my screen.
So is that where everybody wants to go? Stay with our language?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I can live with it.
Because there's no commercial entity that would provide us with testimony saying it's fine to list us, we'll be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're probably not.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
You're going to say take it.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Not good business practice typically. Then you have covered person, you wanted to remove the General Assembly members, I understand. I didn't hear any.
Government lawyers.
Can we just clarify, are we doing on like a substitute based on ours or are we,
Yes.
okay, okay.
Yeah, I'm looking at mostly
We're looking at
commerce,
commerce,
and what
okay.
to bring in from Harvey's and then,
Okay.
yep.
And then also on the assembly members, do we want to do formal general assembly members? Okay.
I don't want to adjust covered person personally.
At all.
Yeah.
Okay, can we talk about active performer? Are we
Oh, yeah, active.
active performer, everybody? Or just judges? Meaning that the rest of the group would just be currently employed as a law enforcement officer.
What you wishes.
I think everybody, but die on the hill.
I just
Should be
everybody.
active former.
I think it should be active performance.
Yeah, farmer's fine for everyone.
Why did municipal employees come out?
They're
Well, we
covered.
took it out as a committee because when we looked at the definition of it and it just kept on going and going and going and going. Sorry, and we meant to talk earlier, yeah.
We get rid of members of the General Assembly. Can we just add in commerce and
Yeah, just Kirk White. The ranking member of commerce in 2025.
They just removed me so quickly. Less council is, all right, so
What do we do about, center members?
Take it off.
Take them out.
we're basically keeping the commerce report.
Keeping.
Yeah. Yep, yeah, I got it. Except active former it'll be formatted to make more sense. Data broker keeping, disclosed keeping, I think,
Yeah.
you like the,
One question about, what's the concept of manufacturer that is important?
Solicit, sell, manufacture.
manufacturer.
That's a Rick question.
In terms of manufacturing? I mean, it's, why would manufacturing constitute disclosing?
If you know two things, can you impute a third?
Or like an inference.
Inference based on.
Okay.
But if you just have it, you're not sharing it, right? It's about sharing. it. I feel like if we're making concessions, we should look at this and see like, is that necessary?
But it is a data broker disclosing. So they are selling.
But manufacturing.
Manufacturer is the word.
Yeah, okay.
Creative, but to me, that means creating. So they're creating your protected information out of what? But they would still, the problem is not that. The problem is that they're gonna sell it, right?
Is it also creating product out of your, or not a product, but like,
Mhm.
say that you have to, I don't know, fill in a form
Mhm.
or something, are you then manufacturing a new something? Document thingy?
Yeah, I don't know, but we're just talking about information here. So manufacturing information means you're creating it from other sources and
Or
you're
from nothing.
Where you're taking
You're making-
pieces of data to make something.
right. And you don't want that either? I don't know.
Synthetic?
Well, yeah, because you can
Is that
create.
about
It doesn't fit to me within the definition of
Okay.
disclosed.
Okay.
What happened to interoperability between states having shared definitions?
Directly from.
Yeah, I don't know how many states.
I remember.
Yeah. Yeah,
So this is using their language.
yeah.
Well, that's important to know.
I just don't know how many of the 17.
Can we get that? Can we?
Yeah, yeah,
Find out how
yeah,
many
yeah, yeah.
states are using this definition.
I think manufactured actually really, in the context of AI, might be something that we want to consider because synthetic data is a thing.
Yeah, artificial person. Okay, sure.
Okay, so we'll get back to,
Yeah, so if you using AI to manufacture someone's identity.
Yeah. Or just making up.
Yes, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to get stuck on that.
Does he know that it's operable?
okay, government lawyer, you wanted to keep in the US attorneys and the specific list. Okay, so we won't bring that over. Juror, we're not bringing that over. Prosecutor stays. The protected information, subdivision B on the right side.
Oh,
I don't think
No,
anyone's crazy about
No, definitely
that.
not. It's like, and this is all knowledge.
What's the point of writing the law? That's in there.
Public defender we're keeping and public agency we're not going to bring over because you don't want to bring.
Did we want to do anything about the study of public agencies?
Yeah, it's probably the end there.
Yeah, I just wanted to see if we did want to track that.
Okay, so we're keeping data broker. We're not going to change the term to public agency or commercial entity. 2A applies just to public agencies, so we're not going to bring that over. That language is the same. Okay. The remedy section. There's not a clear, based on what I remember, what you all want to do here, so.
So I think what we want to do is remove B.
From the commerce, from the left side?
Move P?
Are we going with an injunction? So someone that's aggrieved files an injunction. We can.
Which is A.
Yep, we can add attorney's fees and court costs. And then give the court the ability to calculate damages, but we'll make a fine. We'll have to create a fine schedule. And I think we'll have to talk to our judiciary committee about what they think. Instead of B. Yeah, correct. I see.
I thought we brought up at one point just replacing the word or with and I was
I
into
think
that.
we were talking at the end, we were talking about creating a fine schedule.
So they do the injunction.
Who said?
They would request the injunction. If upon 15 days, it's not ceasing being disclosed. And then you have the injunction hearing. And if it's granted, then there would be attorney's fees, court costs.
Well, so first, yes.
Okay.
If someone has to go, for me, if they have to go through the process of filing an injunction because the data broker didn't honor their request, then they should get their attorney fees and their court costs back. And then we have to create a timeline of if the data broker does not honor the injunction, then that's where the fines come in.
The only, you said, I think it's missing in that construct, I think that construct, I get that. Leaving out, I think, is the notion of, well, I call it damages here, but restitution for the individual who might have been harmed.
Right, and how do you?
But what is their harm? I think that's the question.
That'd be fine.
And I think that, the question, I
Right.
think that needs to be thought of is
Yeah, I
on
get
the
it.
criminal side,
I get
if
it.
somebody,
But yeah, I guess I'm going back to the question. I would love to hear the resolution on irreparable harms and how you prove those. And does this completely void people being able to proactively ask for their information to be removed without having a death or something like that happen?
yeah, I think, I mean, people can request, any of these covered people should be able to request to have their information redacted. If it doesn't happen, here's your remedy. And I think for me, it's stopping the data broker from doing that, right? So how do you do that? You either do it by allowing private right of action, or you do it on a fine schedule.
And under that construct, I think you have to think about an element of deterrence.
Mhm.
And so when you're constructing that fines schedule, has to be significant enough, I think, to deter.
Yeah, I mean, you have first time, here's what you get, second time. I mean, the more you violate it, the more it gets. But that's something that our judiciary committee would figure out.
Do have a question. So I feel like when Representative Harvey presented this morning, it was a lot of talk about how companies will just have a bank of fine money, basically. And I think that is what the civil action allows people to avoid. So I feel like we're losing that piece, but
So I think that our judiciary committee will need to think about, is it an individual that violates, or is it multiple individuals under the same company that have, and they violated the injunction? And so at what point does it get to every day that you violate that? I mean, those are all things they can think about to make the deterrent strong enough for a company to think twice about doing it.
And when you're constructing a fine schedule, you get a bunch of different considerations. Frequency, right?
Right.
How often?
Yep.
Sometimes it's about the size of the company
Right.
that's doing it. I know when, we would find, a small health insurance company, there's different considerations than if it's United Health.
Yep.
So,
do we have a requirements for injunction, Rick, too? Like if people are losing money just trying to do this and then they're found that for whatever reason harm wasn't proved and they're out a bunch of money for filing an injunction. And maybe possibly many injunctions because they're having to file one for every single data broker that has their information, which could be hundreds, if not thousands.
Still use the assignee.
Yeah. Yeah. But they still have to pay for that, right? Somebody has to pay for that.
Well, I mean,
And they're not getting that back in court.
And hopefully there's not hundreds or thousands of data brokers that are not complying.
So some people are gonna hire an assignee, a company that does this business. They should pay for it. It's not free. They pay for it because it's something they want done. We're creating the ability for them to do that. When you get down to, and they're gonna file on their behalf to have the name redacted. After 15 days, if it hasn't been redacted, at that point, you can file an injunction. And if it's the assignee that is filing that injunction, or if they hire a lawyer, and either way, they should have that cost covered to the court and to the assignee or the lawyer, whoever, whatever. So they're made whole again. And then it's up to the court to have do the injunction. And then if they violate that injunction, then it's up to the court to do something about it. And here's what you do. Here's your court. Here are the fines that you consider.
Could we have judiciary do, since it's more their area, can we have judiciary look at doing an amendment specifically just for this section and we do the other ones? Like, okay,
What I'm saying, yeah,
okay, that would be, yeah, okay.
but I'm not. This point, I mean, what we need to think about what our goal is. What's the goal of putting this in, and what's the goal of fines? Or I think for me, the goal is to make sure that this activity doesn't happen. And so in my mind, we get away from, if we install fines, we get away from this constant pounding of PRA, taking someone's ability to sue somebody else away from individual Vermonters. I think we're still getting to the place where we want to be, is to stop that activity from happening.
And deter the future.
Right.
Can it be that if there are just rampant repeated violations, that does trip into a criminal?
That we'd have to, judiciary would have to think about that.
So,
You could.
yeah, when I canceled it, it's fine. We had testimony, and I don't remember from whom, about other states that didn't have an opportunity for individuals to sue. And they said that the businesses just ignored the notice. And-
California,
And then, Rick, you're saying that an injunction is something that a business can't ignore.
They can ignore it, but they'd be in contempt of court.
Again, out of my wheelhouse, so I don't really understand, TV shows are not right. No, but I mean, seriously, this is so far out of my wheelhouse. I don't know how that works. Is that something that a business that a data broker is going to comply with, or is this fee schedule the thing that is going to make this a compliance?
what's going to be the fines after if they don't comply?
Yeah,
That's, I mean, I think as Herb said, those are deterrents that we use all the time. That DFR uses, that DOL uses in workers' comp. If you don't do this, here's your fine, this is your fine. That's how we make sure that businesses comply, is we hit them in the pocketbook. And so the issue that we've had with the private right of action is that we're going to get trolls in here, inundating businesses. So this is a different way of thinking about how do we make those businesses comply? And I think this is a way of doing that, if that's what we want to see happen, is compliant.
so can I so in our original bill, we had a rate of $1,000 per violation as a compromise to any violation you can sue for anything and unlimited, right? So that was we started with a compromise, right? Because normally you can sue for anything. And what we're doing is we're changing it to the person whose information was shared after they requested it not to. There is no benefit to them, but a fine can be charged to the business that would go to the court.
Well, there is a benefit to them that they
I mean, there's a
will,
benefit that they get their information, not shared.
right. And I think if we have a
It's what they
strong,
want.
if we have a strong fine set up, that they're going, the data brokers are going to comply with the requests.
Is this still per violation?
However it gets written.
Yeah, however it gets set up. So, I mean, there's gotta be per violation and then, yeah, I mean, the more you do it, the more it's gonna cost you. Right? The more you violate, the more you're gonna pay.
I think building some notion of the type of company and how big it is, I think, because that makes a difference in terms of bigger the company, sometimes the bigger the fine you need.
That was my point. I think the fine should be proportional to the size of the company.
Yeah, we would do it a lot of times. Depends, there's an insurance company, what you what your premium volume and
You
something.
can always set a minimum floor and a maximum. And in between that you give the court the leeway to determine what that should be.
1% and 100% of revenue.
I was trying to make sure I contextualize what, Tony, what you just said was about leaving discretion to the courts. But the thought being though, that is this money then paid to Washington or some, the Superior Court? Like what is, maybe this is just a judiciary, let them talk about it and think about it. I'm just trying to understand where it goes.
Where these go.
Yeah, and they're fines
Well,
and not fees, right?
I mean, we can determine where the fine go to.
I love the idea of it going to a fund that is used to make people who suffer. from
Don't say so, it goes to jail.
Exactly.
Yeah, but you could appropriate those funds to a victim's, a victim's fund. Where then monies would be paid back to the victim. We have that already. We do that, DFR has that. In fines that they collect, they have a victim's fund.
Which does give an avenue for the person to get some restitution.
I mean, we've all, so many other things we've heard about in DFR, the rise of fraud, people losing so many tens of thousands of dollars life savings to increasingly sophisticated scams. And this would be a nice nexus for consumer protection. It seems very relevant. But I mean, our goal is compliance and
Exactly.
and the protection of privacy for covered persons. That's interesting.
Are we thinking about bumping this portion off the judiciary and just? Because if we're thinking about doing that, then we don't.
So are people comfortable with that concept?
With a fine structure?
Yeah.
I'm not overly opposed to that, especially since it might bring money to the state of Vermont.
I'm perfectly comfortable with it.
Well, and it removes
Yeah.
your issues with ERA, right?
Yeah.
And it still gets to the point where you want to make sure it's compliant.
So I'd kind of like to see what good comes out, right?
Yeah.
Enjoying the silence.
Free weekend.
So we're here to give direction to Rick on what to write for this new amendment. And so we need to let him do that. We're not gonna let him do it tonight. We're gonna let him go home. When we come back Tuesday morning, we're gonna take a look at it 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Whether or not we have enough time to finish it. Because I'm gonna have to ask judiciary to do some work. I think we're on a really good track. I think this is a really pretty strong breakthrough that we have. That actually we could use on other bills. So, let's just, if we're good with that, Rick has enough information. Unless he tells us differently.
I'll, couple things I'm gonna make sure of, but yeah.
And then we'll have to figure out what judiciary thinks about our thought of fine and how they can construct that will be up to them.
Okay, so Representative Bosch talked about the study you want to have done. Can you clarify? Is it ADS you want to have?
ADS, you want VLCT, you want the Clerks Association. Secretary of State's office, so did we?
Do the report.
Yeah.
Election law.
Election.
Because they work with all of the municipalities and the clerks.
Yep, okay, so we want ADS, Secretary of State's office. They're gonna be surprised to hear that we want them, but first time they're gonna be surprised.
And VLCT,
VLCT, yeah.
VLCT.
Clerks Association.
Yeah,
Okay, so those four-ish entities.
Yeah.
To review how this type of thing would affect their,
how we could institute non-disclosure of information to these covered entities.
how they could comply and what issues that would bring up. Yeah,
Correct, yeah. Yeah, and you know, what kind of language they need, what kind of costs that they anticipated, that all of that stuff.
Would an office help? Would the creation of an office help?
Yeah, or could it be done within ADS or? But yeah, all of those questions.
That's one thing I have.
And then the second one that Zach brought us.
Yeah, the report back
Yes. The courts.
from the state court administrator. Yeah, you like that part?
I think it makes a lot of sense. Does everybody?
Love it.
That's great.
2027, I would say, just because
Yeah, I think a couple of years would be
I
good.
mean, there's not gonna be enough
Yeah.
data
Yeah.
Yeah.
from 20.
Starting in 2027. I think through 31's fine.
Okay.
I'll be here. Well, Debbie, you can let me know.
I will let you know.
And finally, for, do you want me to address the remedy section, or am I just punting that over to judiciary, or am I trying to structure something what you all taught? I have an idea.
You can structure something that we can let, and then, you can, well, maybe you can work with, who does the drafting, Michelle, or?
Yeah, it's a three-headed monster of Michelle, Ben, and Eric.
Also one of them?
I try to not associate with those three.
Associated with who?
Those three. They're in their own building. I don't know if you understand. They're over here, away from the rest. Yeah, away from the rest of us. Yeah,
I don't want them.
I already have.
Listen to this and say Rick doesn't want to associate with us.
I have already a little bit talked to them about the injunction stuff, so I can certainly reach out to them and have something that they have vetted. And I think, hold on, make sure before you all leave. I think,
I'm in no hurry anymore, so I've already canceled. Stay here.
yeah,
It's
okay.
Friday, you know.
I would like to go.
Let me, I'm sorry, but for the injunction, let me just make sure I understand correctly. That is still 15 days. Upon 15 days notice, 15 days come and go, a covered person has the right to file an injunction. Okay, at that hearing, if the plaintiff wins, they would get reasonable attorney's fees, court costs, and damages. Right? Okay. If the injunction is violated, then the person would have to file a motion. Okay, and then at that point, the court would entertain fines for the company. Not, do you want additional damages for the person? Would you want attorney's fees though, because they're having to pay the attorney to come back.
Yes. Okay. And then also, we'd have to create a, we have to determine where those fines would go.
Right.
And who would, where would the funds sit? Who would they sit with? Maybe the Attorney General's office.
For like frost relief.
Sure, yeah.
If we need to do, for the injunction, for this, since we're now saying that they have to be successful in the injunction piece, I'm wondering about setting the requirements of what that means.
Standard.
Yeah.
Irreparable harm. Yeah, I will look that up.
Okay, thank you.
That's something you all should know about.
Okay, thanks.
Everybody good with that? Okay, so. If. Determine, I mean, we have to still look at the words and everything. Where is everybody on this? Everybody good?
I just wanna know the harms piece.
We need to
I
see.
just wanna know the harms piece, like what we're actually setting, if we're not setting up people to actually be able to be successful in a civil action.
They gotta be successful, I mean, well.
Well,
I mean, if
can
they're-
they be though? That's what I'm saying. Well, what is harm
I
though?
mean,
That's the piece.
conceptually, is
Yeah.
everybody on board with this?
Yeah, conceptually.
Conceptually.
All right, good. We're done. Thank you. Thank you.
You sure I won't be able to see this over my coffee and croissant in the morning?
So it'd be different.
But that's a good point.
Still live.
I'm impressed that you stayed.
So,
Good to see you.
Eddie, so, well, Tuesday, 9 o'clock, we're gonna come back to this. Rick's gonna have wonderful language for us, exceptional language
Gonna
for
be
us.
perfect.
Have a conversation with the chair of judiciary, to see what his schedule looks like. Hopefully we can either move this Tuesday or put it off for one more day and let judiciary do their thing. Hoping that in the 9 to 10 that we can get to the point where we're good and let judiciary do their thing. But I think we've come a real long way just this afternoon on having this discussion. Zach, thank you for, I think it was helpful to bring your amendment to us as well, so. I think we're at a place where we can make sure compliance is being, it will happen without having people worrying about trolls coming into the state. So, any questions, committee, before we go? Okay, we can go off live. Thank you.